Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Northern Lights. Today, we are honored to have Rania Llewellyn, a trailblazing leader who made history as the first woman to lead a major Canadian bank when she was appointed as president and CEO of Laurentian Bank in 2020. Rania's career spans over 26 years in banking and financial services, with experience in a wide range of sectors, including commercial banking, corporate strategy, and mergers and acquisitions. With her leadership, she has driven innovation, diversity, and inclusion in the financial industry. Her inspiring story from her early days as an immigrant to Canada to becoming a CEO of a major financial institution embodies perseverance, resilience, and a vision for a more inclusive corporate environment. Rania, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Berlin, for having me.
Yes, of course. So, why don't we start off by you telling us about your journey from immigrating to Canada to becoming the first woman to lead a major Canadian bank, and maybe just touching on what were some of the key challenges and milestones you faced along the way?
Yeah, so that's a pretty broad question, but so I was born in Kuwait. I was born and raised in Kuwait. I lived there for 11 years. Went to a British school my formative years, and then moved to Egypt when I was 11. Lived there
Wow.
for a few years, actually 5 years. Finished my O levels, and I actually graduated from high school when I was 14.
Oh,
And so
wow.
that's a story all on its own.
Wow.
And I always wanted to be a doctor, so I actually never wanted to go into business. But at the time, given my age, there was only one private university at the time in Egypt, and it was the American University in Cairo, which is affiliated with the American University in Washington, D.C. And they didn't actually offer medical school. And so what I ended up doing is my dad said, you really should go there. The two top programs at the time were computer science and business, and this was 1990, and computer science was really new. So I was like, I don't know about anything about that. So I ended up going into business. And then when the Gulf War happened, we sat down as a family. I was accepted to do an exchange program with UCLA, and we decided, you know what, if I wanted to finish my education in North America, and my mom was looking to immigrate at the same time. She's from Jordan. We decided to come to Canada.
Mhm.
And I always tell people, had we known about the weather, we would have landed in Australia. But we were really thinking about just in terms of Canada as North America, its proximity to the Middle East. It's just, and so we actually landed of all places in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I transferred into St. Mary's University, finished my undergrad in business. And typical immigrant story, my name at the time was Rania Zakaria Gindil Komos. Started applying for jobs and I wouldn't even get an interview. And so ended up working at Tim Hortons and went back to do my MBA, but got my first break when my dad had a business and his commercial account manager from Scotia met me and said, why don't you come work for us at Scotia? And I said, well, I'm going back to do my MBA. And she said, but we're looking for a part-time teller. And she said, that's perfect. So I started actually as a part-time teller at Scotiabank in Halifax. And then fast forward, graduated, did my MBA, moved into commercial banking. And then, to be honest, looked around Halifax and realized that most of the big jobs are in Toronto. So my husband and I had gotten married, decided to move to Toronto, and met a wonderful lady who changed my perspective on how strong women can actually lead and set and be an example for other women. She was leading a group within the corporate bank called Infrastructure and Power. I ended up spending 7 years of my career there. And then it's just putting my hand up and doing lots of different jobs. So I was at Scotiabank for 26 years. I probably had 7 or 8 different roles that I played. And so and it was all based on me wanting to do different things and learning different things. And then COVID hits. I got a call from a headhunter about the CEO of Laurentian Bank. And to be honest, I didn't know much about Laurentian Bank because it was I think at the time it was the seventh largest bank in Canada, and it's a Quebec-based bank. I
Mhm.
don't speak French, and so I wasn't really sure why they called me, but I was one of those unique bankers who had lots of different experiences. I didn't go up laterally. I just kind of moved around and did different things. So had a broader experience than many bankers. And so I said, why not? Let's give it a shot. And
Yeah.
so made the decision to move, and that's how I got there.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. It sounds like you've had such an incredible journey and you've come so far. That woman that you were talking about who told you about how powerful women can be, I think that's really influential. And, I think that's really great.
Yeah, up until that point, to be honest, prior to that, I had worked for two female leaders who made me doubt wanting to work for another female leader. And so when I moved to Toronto, I still remember having that conversation with her because she's a good friend of mine.
Hmm.
And she is now and a great mentor. And I said, can I just work for a man this time around? And she said, well, that's too bad because you're going to work for two of us.
Oh my
And
gosh.
but it was great. I think the challenges that you have actually form who you are. And I always tell people my journey was not a straight line, right? So there was lots of challenges across like I said, I mean, I when I got married, I actually changed my name and my career trajectory changed. People
Wow.
stopped
Yeah.
asking me where I was from because I look and I talk like I was born and raised here,
Right.
but my name told a very different story. And so when you apply for jobs and your name is on a resume, we all have our biases. And so,
Yeah.
so that was one of my earliest challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's great to hear. And, it sounds again like you've had such a great journey. So great to see your passion develop. Um, so I think our listeners would really like to know, before your role at Laurentian Bank, you spent over 26 years at Scotiabank. What were some of the most formative experiences during your time there, and how did they shape your leadership style?
Yeah, so what I would say, working in corporate banking was formative in the sense that it was greenfield. So
Mhm.
it was before the deregulation of the power industry. We only had a couple of clients, and we had to go out and hunt for new business. And I think that's when I realized my knack of entrepreneurial spirit and being able to kind of hunt for net new businesses. So that was really important. But before I went on my second mat leave, I had heard of this special program that the bank had, which was called the Executive Project Office. And I'm sure your listeners are too young for this, but if you've heard of the show The Apprentice and Survivor,
Mhm.
that was really the experience that this thing was. So they put you on this. It's like they recruit 10 of the top 10 potential employees in the bank at the time. You work on a strategy for the executives, and you present every 2 weeks to an executive committee. And at the time, the future CEO of Scotiabank was on my committee, and other executives were on my committee. So I really didn't know how it was kind of survivor of the fittest. And my project at the time was called multicultural banking because of my background. I was really interested in it. I had no idea I was creating my own job.
Mhm.
So we wrote the strategic report, and then we recommended a new department be formed to go after newcomers to Canada. And I got tapped on the shoulder to say, would you consider doing this job? And to be honest, I hadn't considered doing the job.
Mhm.
But it was interesting because it was a start. Again, it was a startup, it was greenfield, and that really changed my trajectory.
Yeah.
So I was appointed vice president of multicultural banking in 2007. And we launched, and it's still the number one program in Canada to go after newcomers to Canada. So if you're a new immigrant, a foreign student, a foreign worker, the Start Right program, which I launched in 2008, is still kind of the program. It's anchor program at Scotia. And I did it very differently. I went to China, I went to India, and I tried to actually get people to know the Scotiabank brand before landing in Canada so that they don't have to compete with some of the other banks who are already established.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would say the next role was moving into Roynat Capital. I became the president and CEO of Roynat Capital, and that was private equity, sub debt, and mezz. And that was really my first kind of foray into being a CEO. So I actually ran the whole gamut. So I had, marketing, I had finance, I had accounting, I had technology. So it was like it was running a bank within a bank.
Mhm.
And so I got my taste of that. So that was very formative. And then the last one I would say was payments. And I was very strategic in deciding into going to payments. I didn't realize payments was gonna be kind of the next frontier in banking.
Mhm.
All I knew was I wanted to work for my old boss in corporate banking. I wanted to learn something new. And that's what I encourage people is being curious and constantly learning is part of, your career progression. So I used to always
Yeah.
say you should be able to do 50% of the job, and the other 50% is your learning opportunity. And I would
Yeah.
say that was the job that really set me up to become the CEO of Laurentian because I got operations, I built digital platforms, It was global in nature. So I had staff in Singapore, Hong Kong, and London,
Yeah.
and New York, and the US, and Houston, and in San Francisco. And so it was great to get that experience
Mhm.
before moving into the CEO role.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And, it sounds like you've built so much from it and, learned so much. And it's really cool that you created your own job. So kind of just building on that, I'm curious to know, having been the CEO of Laurentian Bank, you have led initiatives around diversity and inclusion. So how do you see the role of leadership in fostering an inclusive environment, especially in a traditionally male-dominated industry like banking?
Yeah, so I think the my early formative years really were critical in terms of knowing exactly the type of culture that I wanted to build when I became a leader. So number one, as an immigrant, even though I had no accent, I looked like everybody else, my
Mhm.
formative thinking years were in a very different continent, different cultural, different upbringing altogether. And that presented challenges for me early on in my career. I was told I was too outspoken, I was too direct, I was
Mhm.
too this, I was too that. And then coupled with the fact that I was, as I mentioned, I was much younger. Like I graduated from my MBA when I was 20. So if you couple the cultural difference, my age, and then put on top of that my gender,
Yeah.
I experienced, I would say, discrimination on so many different fronts, whether it was at work or outside of work, that I very quickly realized how important it is for you to be able to bring your authentic self and perform at your very best is only when leaders can actually create a safe environment where you can be who you are.
Yeah.
And so I used to openly talk about how I was viewed as an average performer in one part of Scotiabank. And then I went into probably one of the most competitive parts of the bank, which was corporate banking. But I had a great boss who welcomed diversity, right? And made it a very inclusive environment. And all of a sudden I flourished. And so when I became a leader, that was really important to me is how do I make sure I build diverse teams so that I'm aware of not recruiting people that think and look like me, but
Hmm.
different perspectives,
Hmm.
based on so many things: education, cultural backgrounds, gender, because we're all very complex human beings. And then as a leader, being aware of our biases, but then how do you give them a voice? So what I tell people is diversity is just a number, it's a
Hmm.
statistic, right?
Hmm.
But to actually create an inclusive environment takes a lot of work because um, if you actually have people on your team who think like you, right, you can make decisions very quickly and move fast, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you necessarily get the best outcomes. But if you actually build very diverse teams, so let's say you've got an introvert and an extrovert, you may get frustrated dealing with someone who's not like you, but
Right.
that person may bring a lot of different ideas and creativity, and it generates innovation. And so you have to be a lot more patient as a leader, and you have to
Absolutely.
create a very safe environment for people to be able to contribute and bring themselves to work every day. And so that was something that was near and dear to myself. And so
Hmm.
making sure that we create that culture and that environment was critical to be honest, to my success in all of the different leadership roles that I had, whether it was at Scotiabank or at Laurentian.
Yeah. You made some really good points there. And I really do think that diversity, inclusion, and the effective gender roles is really important. So, just switching gears here for a minute, during your time at Laurentian Bank, what were some of the innovative approaches you implemented to navigate the changing landscape of financial industries, particularly with the rise of digital banking and fintech?
Yeah, so I think the my payments role at Scotia really set me up for success because I was one of the few leaders in the institution that actually had technology report into a business line. So I had the technology team help me in terms of developing new products and services, adopting agile methodology, setting up Scrum teams, and so really operating kind of like a software company. And so when I went into Laurentian, what really struck me is here I was joining in October of 2020. They had no mobile application, they had no tap on debit. Like they were almost 15 to 20 years behind from a technology evolution perspective. And so you have to think differently in terms of how do you play catch up, but more importantly, how do you leapfrog the competition? And it starts by looking at what are your core strengths and how can you actually move quickly.
Mhm.
And so we made the decision strategically that rather than try to build things internally ourselves, let's actually partner with fintechs and the best of the best to be able to leapfrog the competition and deliver things a little faster to market. So we were able to deliver the mobile app, tap on debit, and some other digital solutions within 12 months, which is unheard of in the banking industry, right? Things
Right.
usually take years to be able to build. But that was because we were very thoughtful in terms of saying we're not going to do it ourselves. We're actually going to partner up, and I would say in terms of focusing on a fewer priorities. Um, so every strategy is different depending on the organization that you're in. But
Yeah.
that was the strategy that we leveraged so that we can actually move faster and be a lot more nimble.
Yeah. That's great to hear. And congratulations on all of your success again. It's really inspiring, to hear your story and all that you're doing. So, just building off of that, your background includes experience in corporate strategy and mergers and acquisitions. How do you balance the need for growth and innovation with risk management in today's rapidly evolving financial sector?
I would say risk is in everything that we do.
Right.
And risk has evolved. I think historically in banking, when people thought about risk, it was just credit risk. So I lend
Hmm.
you money, Berlin. Are you going to lend it back to me? Are you going to pay me back? That was risk. But now, because most companies are technology companies, you have cybersecurity risk, you
Hmm.
have operational risk, you have anti-money laundering risk, you have like, so there's so many aspects of, you have cultural risk, you have reputational risk with social media, right? Like you've got
Right.
so many different aspects of risk. And so uh, being aware of where you're vulnerable, making sure you assess the market, staying ahead of what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the economy, and then to be honest, the way that you can defend yourself is because I can assure you all companies are going to be, attacked from a
Hmm.
cyber perspective. So crisis management becomes a critical component of being a good leader. So how are you prepared to respond when something goes wrong, right?
Right.
So during my tenure at Laurentian, so it was COVID. It was in the middle of COVID, right?
Right.
So that's
Right.
nobody planned for that risk. So how do
Yeah.
you respond to that? Um, I was in the middle of a deunionization, so it was a decertification of the union. So we had that as a risk. Then we had Silicon Valley Bank as a risk. We had all of the interest rate cuts that were happening by the Bank of Canada, and it was happening so quickly. The whole economy came to a shutdown. So all of these
Yeah.
things were all new. And so what I tell people is, it's how do you quickly pivot and how do you respond to that? That's the most important aspect. And so I think risk will continue to evolve. Um, but it's how do you respond and how do you prepare people to be able to respond to the change is the only constant now in any business that you run.
Yeah, it must have been really challenging to manage, your company during COVID because, especially as a leader, everyone's looking to you. So, yeah, that's great. So just looking into the future here, I wanted to really hear your thoughts on the banking industry as it's increasingly focused on sustainability and corporate responsibility. How do you see the industry moving forward in this direction?
Um, so I think, companies have been investing quite a bit on corporate social responsibility. Everyone is kind of focused slightly different in terms of different aspects of it. It's kind of like ESG. When people talk about it, ESG, I remind people there are three letters to that. There's the environmental aspect, there's the social aspect, and
Hmm.
there's the governance aspect. And so, again, I would say that different industries would focus differently on different aspects. And so, for example, in the banking side, there's a lot of pressure on the environmental side, but in Canada, we're a resource-based country, right? So
Right.
it's the transition, and banks support all of those companies that are in that space. And so, how do you create programs to encourage those companies to transition from not great energy into green energy, right?
Hmm.
And like I said, I actually did power and infrastructure for 7 years. And so when I hear people say nuclear is not green, I would argue no, that's not true. Nuclear is green energy, right?
Right.
Um, Coal is definitely not, but it is. And so it's really having that transition. And so how are banks influencing their clients? Are they coming up with products? Are they co-collaborating, co-creating? Are they holding their partners accountable to meeting the same criteria? So banks procure a lot of services, whether it's from Amazon or from PayPal or from IBM or from Google. And so how are you
Mhm.
holding your vendors and partners accountable to that? And then on the social side, I think the banks have definitely gotten better, but I think there's a lot more work to do because as you can see in the C-suite, there's not a lot of women.
Mhm.
But again, it's all about what are the programs that they're creating to create an inclusive and open environment? How are they making them safe environments, right? So
Yeah.
there's still work to be done there. How are we recruiting? How are we retaining?
Mhm.
How are we promoting? And then on the governance side is how are we holding ourselves accountable to addressing all of these things? How is our board being held accountable to doing all that, those things?
Mhm.
So I would say shareholders are expecting a lot more. Uh, the banks in Canada are held to a higher standard, even on a global basis. Like we have some of the top banks in the world. And
Right.
so we need to lead by example, but it's a journey. It's a journey. And
Mhm.
so as long as you're kind of making progress and moving in the right direction, um, I would say that it's definitely top of mind for all CEOs of all banks in terms of the importance of corporate social responsibility.
Yeah. That's great. So, staying on that topic of, the future, being a woman and an immigrant in a leadership role in Canadian banking, how do you see your journey impacting the next generation of women and diverse leaders in the industry?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I'm on my third chapter. So since leaving Laurentian Bank, I just got incorporated. I started up my own consulting firm. I'm actually in the process of designing a program for women leaders, senior women, to help
Nice.
them on their journey of moving up in their organizations or moving out. But
That's great.
and so it's around transforming yourself. So understanding our self-doubt and our inner voice and how do you overcome that and wellness and how do you build resilience and all of that. The second component of the program is how do you transform teams, how do you build high performing teams, how do you change cultures and organizations, how do you get people excited and have that rallying cry.
Mhm.
So I'm building that program right now and I'm going to be launching that in the next little while. So that to me is paying it forward for the future leaders.
Mhm.
It's food for my soul, but how do I actually pay it forward and help in terms of developing the future female leaders in the country? So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah.
Agreeing to do a podcast like this, or I've spoken at MBA programs as a guest speaker, and I'm speaking actually at an undergrad I think it's called cultural diversity at McGill because both my kids go to McGill
Yeah.
uh, uh, to at one of the classes there. And then I'm doing some consulting on the side as well. So to me, I think that when you reach these roles, it's prudent on us in terms of how do we pay it forward and how do we help the future generation in terms of having more equal, I would say equal opportunities.
Yeah. That's really wonderful to hear about your initiatives. And I actually think this leads perfectly into my next question, which is what advice would you give to young women or immigrants aspiring to leadership roles in the financial sector? And are there any particular qualities or strategies that helped you navigate your career path?
I got lots of advice there. So I would say reach high. Don't limit yourself, right?
Hmm.
My program is actually called Beyond Limits because I think a lot of times we actually put our own limitations on ourselves. Find
Hmm.
your voice. I was a very shy kid,
Hmm.
and nobody believes that now, but you need to find your voice. So have the courage to speak up in
Hmm.
meetings, have the courage to ask for what you want. Be curious. Curiosity is probably one of the most important leadership skills that I would say is needed. And that's really just being curious about wanting to know more, right? And
Yeah.
don't rush. Don't rush. I find a lot of people get into organizations and they want to get promoted right away. Learn as much as you can. This is a 50, 60-year journey, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just getting an A on that career path, it's making
Right.
sure that you're actually learning, and failures are okay. You learn the most from challenges, right?
Mhm.
So that's how you build resiliency, is when you are actually challenged. So I would say those are really, really important pieces of advice. Network a lot. And so for immigrants in particular, what I tell them is they're like, it's really hard. I can't find a job. I can't do this. I can't do that. Um, that's because they had a network in the countries that they came from. So you need to build a new network here and seek advice and feedback, right? So I had to adapt the way I conducted my communication style. I had to adapt and not I was still authentic to myself, to who I am, but I
Mhm.
needed to be able to figure out how to navigate within the organization. And at the end of the day, cultural fit is very important. So being self-aware of what environments do you need to operate at your very best? And if the company that you work for doesn't offer it to you, then find another job.
Yeah. Ronnie, you made some really great points there, and I think that's some really great advice, especially to our listeners. So I have one last question for you, which is what legacy do you hope to leave in the banking industry?
That women can make great CEOs, and it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if it's in the financial industry or any other industry, and it's okay to be a vulnerable human leader.
Mhm.
I think that's really, really important, and that women can support other women. Because a lot of times I would say women have good intentions, but because we're a minority group, a lot of times we feel that we don't have the courage to support other women, but to truly give every woman a voice. And so, how do we elevate and lift everybody and make sure that we are on equal footing with all of our male colleagues?
Yeah, I love that answer. So thank you so much for your time today, Rania. I really do appreciate it. And it sounds like you've had such an incredible career and you're continuing to do such amazing things. Paving the way for women leaders is really just so important. And hearing your story is so inspiring, especially to our young listeners who are looking to pursue roles in the financial industry. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Berlin, for having me.
Thank you.